Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
Agile government is a blueprint for reform. By shifting focus to end users, empowering small teams, and embracing rapid iteration, agencies can better meet public needs in a fast-changing world. That's the foundation of the National Academy of Public Administration's new Agile Learning Program. Here with insight into how the course equips leaders with practical tools for navigating complexity and driving change are Dr. Joe Mitchell and Amanda Mullen. Dr. Mitchell serves as the Cooley Fanning Director of Strategic Initiatives and International Programs at the National Academy of Public Administration. Ms. Mullen serves as the Academy's Project Director for Strategic Initiatives. Joe and Amanda, thank you both for joining me this morning.
Thanks, Sherry. Great to be here.
Well, Joe, let's start with you, and let's start with the big picture. What is this Agile government, and how does it connect to the Academy's campaign of grand challenges in public administration?
Great. So as you know, as the former president of the Academy, but maybe your listeners don't all know, we announced the Grand Challenges in Public Administration in November of 2019. These are really big issues that we identified after a year of research and stakeholder engagement that are really the things that we think are the biggest issues and challenges facing government at all levels. From a public administration standpoint, they range from protecting and advancing democracy grand challenges like modernize and reinvigorate the public service, to various social and economic development grand challenges, to environmental grand challenges, and technology challenges. And when we announced these, we said, government is going to have to operate differently in order to achieve these critical challenges, address these critical challenges. And so we established an Agile Government Center as part of that. It was a joint center between us, the Academy, and the IBM Center for the Business of Government that Dan Chinnock runs. And we said this is a new way of operating. It's a really exciting new way of leading and managing organizations. We're trying to scale up the lessons from Agile software development, which are grounded in really putting the user, the recipients of services, the customers at the center, using networks and using cross-functional teams. And we said, isn't there a way to run entire organizations like that? So that is the impetus for the Agile Government Center and the connection to the grand challenges is we need to operate differently in order to address these critical needs.
Amanda, Joe mentioned the use of Agile in software and tech. How does it play out in the government management context, and how does it support reform efforts?
Thank you, Terry. So Agile, as applied to software, is really about breaking that waterfall approach. So we're going to design an effective software product by collecting all of the requirements up front, and then we're going to execute on those requirements over time. And we're not going to really test those requirements. We're not going to capture end user feedback as we go. We're not going to iterate. We are going to spend a lot of time planning up front and then executing, and then hope that the thing that we get at the end is what we need. If you take that and apply it to Agile government, we can see where we spend a lot of time planning up front. We spend a lot of time planning our 5-year budgets at the federal level. We have bills that are omnibus bills that are trying to solve a multitude of different challenges. And we try to really get all of those things agreed on up front. And then as we go, we don't necessarily collect that end user feedback, and we don't necessarily change our approach. So Agile really takes those principles that Joe mentioned, needing networks, needing cross-functional, multidisciplinary teams, persistent iteration, capturing that end user feedback, and really takes the process that I described, the waterfall process, and says, as we go, we need to do 2-week sprints or shorter time periods where we're testing those requirements. Are these the requirements that we need to meet in order to have a result that improves the lives of the American public?
How is that playing out in practice? Can you share some examples of where agencies are using this Agile approach to really drive change, Amanda?
Of course. So in our Agile Learning Program, we emphasize a number of cases to really give people practical, actionable situations where Agile principles have been applied. So we've got a number of cases, and I'll highlight a few. The I-95 situation in Pennsylvania, where there was a large catastrophe, a major throughput bridge was totally decimated by a fire. This was going to take 6 to 8 months to fix. Governor Shapiro said, no, that will not be the case. And so they really applied these agile practices of innovating. How can we leverage our private sector partners in the area to get this bridge rebuilt in a quick time frame? So another principle of Agile is focusing on speed. So are there ways that we can not bypass all of our processes and procedures, but designate as an emergency, we need to move faster in order to make sure that we're not having folks having to drive around this throughput area for 6 to 8 months. It's really going to be hard on the businesses that exist in the area. It's going to be hard on the commuters. So taking those processes of government and making them work better for delivering results. Another example that we have in our course is looking at trust at the Veterans Affairs Administration. So they looked at their wait times for obtaining services, and we're finding that was not meeting the needs of the veterans that they served. And so when Bob McDonald came in under the Obama administration, he was looking for what is a metric that I can use to measure success of implementing changes at the Veterans Affairs Department, and he selected trust. Do the veterans that we're serving trust us to deliver services to them? And they were able to improve measurements of trust from just under 50% to well above 80% during his tenure.
I'm speaking with Dr. Joe Mitchell. He serves as the Cooley Fanning Director of Strategic Initiatives and International Programs at the National Academy of Public Administration. And Amanda Mullen serves as the Academy's Project Director for Strategic Initiatives. Joe, do you want to follow up on some of the examples that Amanda just gave?
Yeah, I just wanted to note as a kind of a yes and to everything that Amanda is saying is that, one of the issues that we find is that people are doing Agile, but they may not necessarily call it Agile. And so one of the things we're doing is really identifying what are the core principles and practices of Agile so that people can develop that mindset and so that they can start being conscious of being Agile. So, instead of just kind of defaulting into Agile, it's like you're like, hey, I'm proactively and strategically doing this. So I would just add that. That's one of the things when people are like, what are the examples? It's like, well, sometimes people are being Agile and they're not giving themselves credit for being Agile, and we want to do that.
So Amanda mentioned an Agile Learning Program. Is part of that Agile Learning sharing Agile as a framework for practitioners?
Absolutely. Yeah, because this is not an academic, exercise. This is something that we want people to be able to put into practice. And it really is an exciting new way of leading and managing. So we're excited to help people learn how to do that and put it into practice.
Well, speaking of that, Amanda, the Academy's rolling out a new Agile Learning Program. Tell us about what's on offer.
Thank you, Therese. So we're partnering with the Professional Development Academy at the Government Executive Magazine to deliver a 6-week course on practical ways that all members of all levels of government can be more agile. So the course covers the history based in the software design, but how does that lead into management practices? And then how was that evolved by our fellows to agile government? There's a foundational module focused on the mindset of the individual. So that growth mindset, that agile mindset on an individual level is really critical to allowing agile to flourish in your organization. And then leveraging the uniqueness of government, that public service motivation that oftentimes we find in public servants, that is key to implementing agile. Then going through all of the principles that we've mentioned throughout this conversations. What are the catalysts for implementing Agile at your organization? Communication is really key. Organizational health is key to supporting an organizational culture that allows for Agile to flourish. And then focusing on that trust piece. So how can we measure trust as individual agencies, and how can we improve competence to improve trust in our public institutions? So we'll be delivering this course. The nuts and bolts of it and why this is important for folks to take is we'll be leveraging the thought leadership of over 10 of our fellows that have worked in federal, state, and local government, as well as having 2 foundational leadership coaches, Ed DeSev and Richard Callahan, who will be guiding the students through each of the modules.
And is this a virtual course or is it in person?
So this is an asynchronous virtual course, so you can take it wherever you're located at in the country, and you will have a Friday session where you will be asked to join us virtually so we can help answer your questions. There'll also be a breakout group component so that you can learn from your fellow practitioners as you go through and apply Agile principles to different situations.
And where do people sign up if they're interested?
So our website, www.napawash.org, and you can find information to get to our Agile Learning Program.
Thanks, Amanda. And Joe, just to kind of wrap up, one of the things I've always thought was interesting about Agile is its connection to organizational health. And certainly within the federal executive branch, organizational health has been challenged over the past few months. For people who participate, what can they expect to take away in terms of bringing better culture or climate to their own organizations?
Well, I think that you're exactly right with organizational health, and organizational health is really about how you run the place. And I think that from an Agile standpoint, Agile empowers employees. It allows leaders and managers to kind of play a different role, less of a hierarchical role and more of a support the team, empower the team, clear out the roadblocks kind of an approach, and working on really productive cross-functional teams and being able to demonstrate that you are providing the services that people need, want, and deserve, I think is a way of improving the culture inside organizations and really kind of how you run the place. So Agile is an important new method for ensuring that you have a healthier internal operation. And that then leads to higher performance, which we're certainly hoping leads to increased government trust among the public.
I've been speaking with Dr. Joe Mitchell. He's the Cooley Fanning Director of Strategic Initiatives and International Programs at the National Academy of Public Administration, and Amanda Mullen, who serves as the Academy's Project Director for Strategic Initiatives. Thank you both for joining me, and congratulations on the course.
Thanks so much. We're looking forward to offering it to your listeners.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.
What makes a great leader in government? Christine Harada joins WEPA CEO Shane Canfield to reflect on her journey from aerospace engineering to the White House. In this episode, she shares lessons on public-private collaboration, leading with purpose, and why service, not power, should guide leadership.
Hello, and welcome to the Lessons in Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Today, I'm joined by Christine Harada, former Senior Advisor at the Office of Federal Procurement Policy within the Office of Management and Budget. Ms. Harada, welcome, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
You spent portions of your career working in both the public and the private sector. And from your experience, what makes leadership in the federal sector different than the private sector?
At the highest level, leadership in the public sector is very fundamentally at its core mission-driven. Right? The work is in the service of the public good, and the goals in the programs are frequently long-term, they're systemic, and they're incredibly complex. And success, isn't necessarily measured by quarterly earnings. We don't have that kind of drumbeat, but certainly more by the lasting impact that we have on Americans' lives. What's also unique about public sector is, in my view, the profound sense of history that you feel. And I think certainly I was very aware about the work that I was doing and how it builds on the efforts of those who came before me, and that future generations of leaders also depend on the decisions that were being made today. And that, for me, certainly provided a greater weight of responsibility.
That's a wonderful answer. And I was in the private sector for much of my career, and now WEPA is a nonprofit, and I really relate to what you said about being mission-driven rather than profit-driven. You've got a long-term view, and always at the core of it is serving others.
Yes.
Is there a moment that stands out to you from early in your career that influenced your leadership style later on?
I started out my career as an aerospace engineer, building satellites and airplanes. And when I first entered the workforce, my organization at the time had 120 people. We were a large company, 120 people, 4 women, and I was the only woman of color. I was also the youngest throughout the entire organization. And so, I remember having an experience when I was doing some engineering work. We had a design review, and I had seen some issues with the flight software that I pointed out. At the time, they're like, maybe it's not really that big of a concern. I was like, but in my heart, I knew that the issue was real and stayed with it. And sure enough, a few weeks later, that topic came up again, and we addressed it. Turns out my concern did indeed prove to be valid. And so it's just one of those experiences that really sank into me around ensuring that I am listening to everybody period, end of story, within the organization, really thinking through about how do we take into consideration opinions from all different spectra. You know, as a third generation Japanese American, right, I was raised to be humble, keep your head down and work hard, etc. But at times, leadership also requires you to speak up, do so politely, with courage, etc. Even though you may be the only voice in your room, but certainly trust your voice. It also really helped shape my belief around diversity. DEI programs right now are viewed in a negative light. We're all mosaics, and they become better because you have those different experiences. And that's really stayed with me throughout the entirety of my career.
The diversity issue is a really big one coming from the insurance industry. That's an industry which is working on that. It's really a diversity of viewpoint and perspective and experiences that does influence your business. And more diverse employee bases absolutely helps. Was there a time in your federal career, perhaps when you were at OMB, that you faced what you consider a real challenge? And how did you overcome it?
One moment that really stands out in particular was when I was serving as the Federal Chief Sustainability Officer during the Obama administration. We had set, like many administrations, had set some really ambitious goals, very, very, very ambitious goals around how do we think about making the federal government's operations much more sustainable. But the challenge wasn't so much about the scale or the technical capacity of the organization. A lot of it was really centered around the funding. We overcame this largely by being very strategic, helping out with blocking and tackling with the variety of legal issues or legal questions that might have come up, like how do we address this? Certainly in the federal government, you're more often leading through influence as opposed to pure form authority, and that you really need to listen deeply, communicate clearly with folks, building out those coalitions and engaging with your stakeholders. And I know many folks in government speak like that, but that is the truth.
As someone who's spent time in both the federal and the private sectors, what makes the relationship between the two sectors important?
Certainly, it's an absolutely essential partnership, and I would add on to that like nonprofits or philanthropic organizations. As I mentioned before, I'm Japanese American, and in Japan there's a symbol for thunder, which looks like 3 arrows pointing around each other in a circular pattern, kind of to represent the swirl, if you will, of clouds. And that's kind of how I view the relationship between the government, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector. The government frequently sets the vision, the policy, the direction, but of course it's the private sector that brings the capital, the innovation, the skill set, the capabilities, et cetera, to be able to execute. Partnering with that, of course, are the nonprofits who may be supporting the surrounding society. Public-private collaboration is not just about contracts or compliance, but it's also about figuring out what's your shared purpose. That's when real transformation can and does actually happen.
In life insurance, there's a concept, lifetime value, where bringing a new insured in costs a lot more money than the amount of premium. And so when you talk to commercial carriers, it's a similar kind of thing. You need to bring them into the concept that they're going to be with us 20 years, and after 5 years, you can ride through that. But it's a concept that isn't easy for commercial businesses to understand. That's a partnership too. Very, very similar. What advice would you give to somebody aspiring to become a leader in government?
There are 3 things, right? So firstly, around leadership in government, you want to make sure that you're leading with purpose. You want to stay grounded in your values, and don't underestimate the power of relationships. Remember why you entered public service in the first place, and that'll help carry you through some of the inevitable challenges that you're going to face. Making sure that you are also investing in relationships. In government, you rarely have full control, and I think this is, in my view, more important in government than perhaps in the private sector. You are frequently leading through influence. You are collaborating with very different parties who frequently have very different agendas than you do. And so building that trust, investing in building that trust and planting those seeds earlier and along the way in your career, I think is absolutely critical. And certainly last but not least, I would say, don't feel that you have to have it all figured out on day one. Absolutely stay open to the unexpected. Say yes to the opportunities that stretch you, and know that you can lead from wherever you are. It's not just about position or hierarchy. It's about the impact that you can have.
What wonderful advice, especially in today's world, which is a little topsy-turvy. who is one person, someone you know personally or perhaps someone well-known, that's impacted your leadership style?
The leaders that particularly stand out for me are Colin Powell, a woman named Carla Harris, who was a managing director in investment banking, and then last but not least would be my father. Starting with perhaps the more famous one, Colin Powell. I read his biography, loved his perspectives and the rules of leadership that have been particularly influential for me, right? So get mad, then get over it, share the credit, perpetual optimism, a force multiplier, things of that nature. And hearing his story was certainly very inspirational for me. And so I certainly very much look up to him as a role model. The second person that I mentioned is a woman named Carla Harris. She's an African-American woman, became a managing director at an investment bank in the 80s, at a time when there were not that many women of color in investment banking in New York. And so she's published a book called Her Pearls of Wisdom. It's one of her trademarks. She always wore a pearl necklace, and she has pearls of wisdom around how can you be authentic and build relationships to be successful in super challenging environments. And she had a lot of guidance on the importance of finding sponsors and mentors. And certainly last but not least, my father is really my why for I do a lot of the work that I do in the public sector. He started out life like many other, immigrant kids in poverty. He was a strawberry farm laborer. Japanese Americans at the time were not allowed to own the land, so we worked the land. He grew up in that kind of environment. And I just think it's absolutely neat that someone who came really he was dirt poor, to say it, and his daughter ended up working in the White House twice. It's quite the American dream, and I would very much like to have that opportunity available for other people as well.
Well, wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Christine, thank you very much for your time today and all of these learnings. It's really good, impactful. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
I'm Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Until next time on Lessons in Leadership.
Find the full podcast and future episodes of Lessons in Leadership on the Federal News Network app and anywhere you enjoy your podcasts.